Welcome to the We Hack Purple podcast, where each episode we meet a new person from our industry that teaches us something extraordinary. This episode, I am going to talk with Ariel Shin, but you don't get to meet her yet. First, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor. Yes, that's right. We are sponsored by Women Cyber Jitsu for this episode and the next couple of episodes. Women Cyber Jitsu is an organization that focuses entirely on trying to get way more women into our field. And they do this in a number of ways. They have mentoring programs, which are really quite cool, and you should check them out. They have training where they teach women tons of very important skills so that they can find jobs and prosper and excel and get promoted and eventually be CISOs or even CEOs. And they have events. And one of their events is June 24th, 2023. And it is called Cyber Jitsu Con. And it is an explosion of activities. They're going to have their 10th year of Cyber Jitsu awards for people who are particularly awesome. And this is for allies and women and non-binary folks that are really fighting the good fight. They're also going to have training. They're going to have talks. They're going to have the Wicked Six hacker games. And I've been like a whole bunch of years to this, and it's really fun. And I strongly recommend it as an event to attend. And I'm going to be the opening keynote. So there's also that. I am also going to tell you about We Hack Purple has two new courses, Practical TLS and Open Source Intelligence Gathering in our academy that you should go check out at academy.wehackpurple.com. But more importantly, we have brought on 5 new professors, and it's going to be awesome. So we have someone who teaches web app hacking and secure coding. We have someone that teaches open source intelligence gathering, someone who's going to teach encryption, so SSL, TLS, how to implement it practically. We have threat modeling, and we have a whole bunch more coming for you. And so if you want to learn more about that, you should go to wehackpurple.com and check it out. Or I guess email Tanya at wehackpurple.com and I'll send you our fancy brochure. It's very fancy. But you didn't come for this. That's not what you came for. You came for our guest. And so without further ado, let's meet Ariel Shin. Welcome, Ariel.
Hi, Tanya.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. I met Ariel through my friend Leaf, who works at Twilio, and he works with her. And he's like, I might know someone that's awesome. Did you need a podcast guest? And I was like, you know what? I do need someone that's awesome to be my podcast guest. Can I meet her? And so, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Ariel, and I'm a product security team lead at Twilio. I'm leading a new team that is embedding within our flagship product messaging. I've been in the application product security space for about 3 years, and before that, I worked as a pen tester. Just want to say thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Me too. So you actually have just led into my first question, which was kind of like, how did you get to where you are today? Because it's not like you go to school and then you're like, boom, I'm a pen tester, right? It's not like being an accountant. So how'd you do that?
It's super funny because some of the key terms that you said, I went to school with a computer science degree, and then I worked for an accounting firm basically that had a pen testing division. And so that's really kind of what happened was they were looking for students who had computer science backgrounds, and they would train you a lot. I think they have kind of retention as an issue. And so they're just bringing in a lot of new grads. You go through a lot of training and you get exposure to a lot of things. So with pen testing, they had network security, web application, and mobile security. So I was able to get exposed to all of these different fields within pen testing, and then decided this isn't for me. And so I actually moved states. So I moved to Texas for this job, and then moved back to California and joined as an application security engineer, and then have been down that path since.
Moving is a lot of dedication. I have never moved for a job. I won't even commute at this point for a job. I just sit at home.
Yeah, it was a different time. This is pre-COVID, so it was really wanted a new opportunity. I thought software engineering isn't for me, and this one seemed to be adjacent. I didn't fully understand that they were hacking. In The first time I had chatted with one of my teammates, he was saying like, "Oh, we're going to social engineer these people," and I'm like, "Sure, you're going to socially engineer in air quotes," because I didn't think that was a real thing that was someone's job. And so I learned a lot just kind of that first month I was there about this brand new field and all the opportunities that exist.
I honestly can't even imagine. Like the first time I joined an AppSec team where they were called AppSec. Previously, I would be on the security team and I would be the dev nerd on the security team. And I knew I was doing AppSec, but I got to join and everyone knew AppSec. They already knew it. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to learn so much. This is awesome.
Yeah, it was definitely just like I fell into it and I was like, this is so amazing because they don't really teach you about security in many computer science courses. It's really, they might mention it in your network class, like HTTPS is great. And then that's kind of the end of it. And so you don't really think about it when you're a student. And then there's this entire field, and developers are working with security engineers, and you don't realize how big the industry is until you're actually in it.
Yes. Yes. I agree just with 100%. So the whole time, if you're listening and not watching, Tanya was just like nodding her head very vigorously. So a thing that I noticed, and so Ariel and I were talking before we were recording. So when I switched from software development into security, so first I was a pen tester, but then I switched into AppSec, and I had to learn soft skills that I did not have. What did you like? Do you find that soft skills are important in cyber? Is this a real thing?
I think it's so important because a lot of what we do doesn't speak for itself. People just aren't going to do what we ask them to do, even if though we say pretty please. We're going to always feel a certain amount of pushback. And that means we have to influence using soft skills. We don't have many other things to rely on.
Yeah. So, what are the types of things that so you're saying like people aren't going to fix things just because we say pretty please, which I have tried. And I even offered bagels and cookies previously, and it doesn't always. So, cookies sometimes work, just to be clear, but not very often, not enough that it can be your whole AppSec plan. What are some situations where we might need to try to, I guess, like use our like better communication skills, I guess?
I think on a smaller scale, it's the developer that you're working with as a product security engineer, supposed to work alongside development teams and say, hey, these are the top 10 risks of the company. Let's work very hard to burn these down. And we're competing with other aspects of their product roadmap. There may be some features that they need to get delivered. That's a business priority. There may be other concerns like UX or accessibility. Security just happens to be that one other thing that they're concerned about when they're millions of things that they're concerned about. And so we're kind of competing against all of these other concerns to say, hey, this is really important. And you have to kind of contextualize that impact for them. You can't just say, hey, work on this. You're going to be in this scary, bad world if you do it, because they're going to say, you've said that about every single thing. Why do I need to prioritize this item when I have other competing tasks? So part of that might be forming a relationship with that developer. If you're able to form that relationship, you build trust. You have a bit more social capital to influence them to say, hey, do you mind working on this? But there might be other ways that you want to influence the org, and that could be meeting with leaders so that there's that top down approach, and you're also approaching it with the developers bottoms up. But it's influencing an engineer is extremely important just in that small scale alone. You need to have a good relationship for them to actually consider your input.
Do you feel like you have to influence the other way as well? So, like, I remember explaining to my boss of the security team, oh, well, the developers have this giant deadline Friday and it's Wednesday. So they asked if they could push our big meeting to next week. And I said, yes. And she's like, why? Security is just as important, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, well, but does it really matter if our meeting's Wednesday or Monday? Like, have you seen that, or is that just stuff that I've seen where I have to advocate for the devs with the security team?
Yeah, I've seen that as well. I don't think that drastic where like someone was pushing back on a day or two, but sometimes it's you're advocating for the developer to say, "Hey, I agree that this is a ridiculous standard, and I'm sorry, but like let's find a medium ground." I think there are always compromises, but Trying to think. I think there was a back at previous company I was working with the mobile team,
Mhm.
and some of those standards are kind of outdated or they just require you to do a lot. I think one of the requirements was that you must have copy and paste disabled. And our initial thought was, how are you supposed to use a password manager if I can't paste in my password? You want folks remembering their password. And so it was kind of, I was on their side being like, this is a ridiculous ask. That's not even something that is a security concern. Why is this being brought up? And so I was definitely an advocate for them there and pushing back on some of these standards or requirements that were too restrictive and didn't have a meaningful security impact.
Okay, so that's awesome. Good job. Um, because I sometimes I feel like I'm the only one that does that. Like I've had people say like, "Are you on our team or their team, Tanya?" I'm like, "I'm on the whole business's team, and I don't think we should die on this hill. I'm telling you, we have lots of hills that are worthy of dying, and I don't feel this is the one personally." Um,
Yeah.
so a big part of your job, I suspect, and you can tell me if this is wrong, is discussing severity and impact. And like each business is totally different. Is that something where you would need good communication skills?
I fully agree. Severity is something that we talk about a lot as the org, where when you rate something as a critical or a high, you have to be very clear as to why it's given that rating and explain it in terms of its impact. I sometimes see a lot of people just say, I'm going to pull in the CWSS. And that kind of gives me a score. I'm going to pull in kind of Sneak gives me a score or Bug Crowd gives me a score. And I'm just going to use that. And I don't need to explain myself because it's there. It's given and it's standardized, but that doesn't mean a lot for a developer who's just seeing this score and not understanding why. And so with our vulnerability tickets, we actually explain why we rated this a P1 or a P2. And I think we need to get better at standardizing how we explain it. But when I'm on a meeting and some people are arguing that this should be a lower severity or maybe it should be a higher severity, I have my reasons based off of probability and impact that explain in contextual terms that they can understand. This is important. We've rated it as such.
Would you feel so, listeners and viewers? Tanya's been on a threat modeling kick lately. I know, but I have to ask her about threat modeling. Would you say that? Um, would you say that threat modeling kind of helps you explain why, like whatever tool you've used gave it a medium, but you feel that it's higher critical?
Yeah, I love our threat models because I actually try to pull in from findings that actually exist, especially for our GraphQL findings. I actually just look at bug crowd and see all of our GraphQL findings and be like, hey, this is what one of our researchers found, and this is actually a common issue that they found. How are you protecting against this? And that makes it seem real versus this hypothetical attack that they don't know the probability of. There's 100% probability here. The researcher found it. So there's no question of are they going to find it again or not? If they see a new endpoint, they're going to check for this. And so that's always really, really helpful during threat models to provide that context.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. And viewers and listeners, if you're not aware, actually, do you want to briefly explain what threat modeling is, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, so threat modeling is an activity like primarily before you actually release the product. So very early on in the design stages where you identify threats and then prioritize those threats and identify controls and remediations to protect against those threats. And at Twilio segment, we work on making this developer driven. So the developer should be identifying threats, and we work alongside them to make sure that they've got enough coverage of all the attacks, and then we'll work with them in finding remediations.
And threat modeling is totally so the threats that you find can be completely different from one business to another business to like a governmental organization to a nonprofit. Like when I switched from the Canadian government to private industry, the threats were totally different. Like private industry, well, if you've got money, someone wants to steal it, right? If you've got intellectual property, someone wants to steal it. But in the Canadian government, quite often we're like, please read our data. Please, citizens, pay attention. So it was such a flip on its head for me and you were part of a company that got acquired, And so then now you have two different, or maybe even more types of threats that you have to look at. I'm not asking for you to tell us private information, just to be clear, but like, did you find that things changed?
The biggest shift actually was when I worked for a healthcare company and then I moved out of healthcare because when you're working at a healthcare company, everyone's aware about HIPAA and PHI. And so it's a bit easier to convince folks on some things to be like, well, that's personal, like that's health data. So let's protect that. Let's actually do the most that we can do. And so for some items where maybe they're not so sensitive, but they're public facing, you do have to put a little bit more effort to convince someone. And then I found that at Twilio as well, there's a lot of work to convince folks like, hey, like this is something really important that should be prioritized over some of the feature work. And not being able to pull that PHI trigger sometimes gets to me because it was a very easy crutch to lean on to say it's kind of a compliance thing. Like I'm leaning on this, and there's no ifs, thens, or buts. You must work on this. Can't really do that when you don't always have it's a longer conversation.
Yeah, for sure. It was similar in the Canadian government where I would be able to say, this can affect Canadian citizens in this way. And obviously, the citizens were our boss, right? And so, like, we're held accountable by them. And when we screw up, sometimes we're in the newspaper, right? Like, it's not a good look. Um, so so to go sort of like backwards in our conversation a bit. So I remember you were saying like your favorite part of security was kind of getting to have those discussions and being able to kind of like hone your ability. So do you like how do you explain risk in plain language? Or how do you debate like this one's worse? Or are there any tips for us of like things that work for you besides PII and HIPAA? Because I'll
Yeah.
use that.
I think first things first is develop that relationship, build that trust. If you help someone out with something, they're more likely to help you out in return. And so, having one on ones with developers, being part of a security champion or security partner program, that just really helps build that relationship. But when it comes to communicating well, I think you should understand the impact of the attack. You should be able to explain why that would affect the company. If that's financially, if that's through their public image, there should be a terminal impact, meaning there's something that they can see at the end that they say, hey, this would be a really bad thing. And it should feel tangible. It shouldn't be an attacker's going to get in our system. That's actually not a terminal impact because what happens if they get into the system? Are they taking money from you? Are they ruining your brand? Are they stealing customer data and selling that? That should be your terminal impact, not an attacker can get in. We don't always go to that final step to explain it. I think it's really important so that people can visualize and understand what can go wrong.
Have you ever had it go the opposite way? Because I remember once there was, so something happened at one of the many departments that I'd worked for, and I've contracted for even more governmental departments than I worked at. And I remember there was an attack where they had stolen some data, but the attack they had used, all they could do was select statements. And so, and the database was super hardened and all of these things. So it couldn't escape the database server. It couldn't delete anything or modify anything. And so I looked and it turned out all the data was publicly available. And in fact, that governmental agency was trying desperately to get the public to look at that data. And we're trying to promote it. And so then, then our data was for sale on the dark web. And I was like, maybe someone will buy it and they'll finally read it. And they're like, this isn't funny, Tanya. And I'm like, obviously we need to fix it. But I ended up getting into this big battle with a security person from another department where I was like, yeah, tomorrow first thing we're going to fix it. And they're like, no, it's in the middle of the night and you're going to call people at home and wake them up. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Like it's a read only user. The rest of the system's locked down. It's got like network segmentation. It's got all these things. So like the only thing they can do is continue to steal this data that's perfectly public and available on our website. So I'm like, yes, we got to fix it. Obviously, it's embarrassing to have our stuff for sale. Also, for a very small price, Ariel. They're asking only like $48, which I found embarrassing. I feel we're worth way more than that. My boss did not think that was funny. And have you ever seen it where it's the opposite, where it's like you do the threat model and then you're like, actually, maybe this can be fixed tomorrow or next week or something. Has that happened?
Definitely. I think sometimes as a security conscious person, I want to think that everything is bad and that our skeletons are buried very shallow and at any second we will be compromised. But it's not that. The day goes on and me waking up an engineer at 4 a.m. versus 8 a.m. doesn't have that big of an impact. So we've actually shifted our on-call schedule where if you're not going to get paged at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., you're going to get paged when you log online because I'd rather you be awake and alert to deal with the problem than be really tired and attempting to understand all of that information. So I think the certain number of hours don't matter. And with our threat models, we actually have a distinction between blocking and non-blocking. So you define what the release date will be for your design. So let's say it's going to be GA, and we'll give a recommended time frame so that you have enough time to put in those changes. But some of our findings are non-blocking. They should not affect you from releasing your product on time. It should not delay you. That can be done afterwards. They should still be done. It's kind of in our best practice, but we don't need to fix it right away. And then there are items that are blocking, that are important, that are critical, and that would cause some issues, maybe bring someone on call if it gets exploited. So yes, please fix this before your release date. But that distinction I think is extremely important because we shouldn't we shouldn't create this alarm fatigue where we say everything is important. The alarms are always going on. So you're going to get burnt out engineers who no longer care.
Okay, so I want everyone to pay close attention to what Ariel just said. I've heard the expression alert fatigue, and I feel like there must be some sort of AppSec person complaining at me fatigue. And I remember my first full-time role doing AppSec, I had gone to a meeting and told them like, oh, there's this problem. It's really bad. We got to fix it. And they had said, maybe next time. And I was like, what? And after the meeting, I was really disappointed. And I said to my boss, so he was a very good boss. And he said, you said basically the sky's falling. You didn't say this is how it will affect us financially. You didn't say this is how it is a risk to the mission of our organization. You didn't say how this could hurt our reputation. You just said the sky's falling. You sound like the other guy before you. Oh, every meeting, the sky's falling, the sky's falling. We just tune him out because he was annoying. And he would also have everything be 10 on 10. There was never a 2 with that guy. There was never a 4 or an 8 or an 8.5. It was always 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. And he's like, and literally when that guy talks, it's like my ears turn off. And so you need to explain, like, is this going to hurt one of our employees? Is this going to result in potential death? And so then I came back the next week and I was like, here is what could happen and would be very easy to happen. And we know, so I need to use my words carefully so I don't make it very clear where I was working. And here's how it could affect like the mission of our organization. So each governmental department has 1 or 2 or 3 missions that they must do. So for instance, the privacy commissioner, guess what they're in charge of protecting? Privacy of citizens, right? And so they have this mission. And I was like, and if this did happen, this would greatly affect our mission. And this segment of the citizens, like, of course, the citizens at risk are the ones that would be hurt the most. And you know that it is our goal to always put them first. And so as a result, I believe, even though the stupid little scanner says it's a low, I believe for our business model, it is actually critical. And they looked at me and they're like, approved, go do it right now. And I was like, so how, like, if you were going to try to help our listeners try to figure out how they could explain things better, do you have any ideas or thoughts for them, or maybe examples of where you explain something just to try to, because I found this hard, Ariel. I found it really hard to learn how to do that. And it feels like you were like a fish to water and you just went on swimming. So yeah.
So a little more about me is that my background comes from debate. I did high school debate for 4 years and then coached for a few more years. And the first thing that they teach you is how to make an argument. And so an argument is defined as a claim, a warrant, and an impact. I think that's really, really true for how we should convince folks. So the claim is what you're trying to say. So it's this finding should be a critical. So let's say there's SQL injection and I'd like a developer to get it fixed. So this SQL injection should be a critical. So you should fix this now. The warrant is why. Why should I fix this? So then I would explain the SQL injection allows an attacker to dump the entire database, and that database contains sensitive information. We don't want that sensitive information about our users to be out there. The impact is, why does that matter? So yes, sensitive information is out there, but why should I care? And that could be A, we have compliance obligations. B, we would lose trust. We would lose customers. C, it would have a financial impact as attackers might be selling that for the company and might drop our stock price because we're a publicly traded company. It's, you want to go all the way to that terminal impact on how does that affect the engineer. And you want to balance that with this like doomsday scenario of like the sky is always falling. So this SQL injection is a critical finding for us since it has access to sensitive data. And I'm going to state the impact as a critical impact. But if you have lower findings, for instance, we get a lot of informational findings that are security best practices, I'll state it as such, that this is a security best practice that we'd like you to do. I'll give them ample amount of time. And the impact is that like it's a best practice that doesn't explain to me why I should do it. Like, why do I need to be following all of these security best practices? And at times it's you lean on your policy. It's we always, that's what we do as a company. That's something we've chosen to prioritize. And that would be your impact, is that it matters to the company, just like you said, tying it back to the mission of the company, especially if it is such an informational finding and people don't feel that urgency to fix it right away. And it's not the fanciest fix.
Yes. And I want to, so first of all, I never occurred to me that studying debate in school could make you really awesome at this. I was always like, well, obviously they'll all become lawyers now. But it turns out the skills for many areas, that's so brilliant. And also like adding on, that if you have different types of users or different types of customers or different types of citizens, in our case that I was talking about, it was like the people that are most vulnerable. But when it comes to almost all systems, Ariel, the people that are most vulnerable are the ones we're trying to protect, right? Like when we're threat modeling, it's not for necessarily the super rich people or the super famous people or the super high up people necessarily that we're protecting. It's every single type of user, including the single mom or the unemployed person or the like people that are young, people that are minors, etc. I feel like you made a lot of really good points, Ariel. This is awesome.
Yeah. And the other thing, I just talked about like different audiences that we're protecting, but it's the different audiences that we are explaining things to. Having a conversation with an executive or a leadership member is extremely different than a conversation you're having with an engineer. That's actually what I love about pen test reports, is that you start with that executive summary, and it's meant to be executives are only going to read the first few pages. Managers will read up to page 6, so they're going to see the high level findings, and then the engineers are the ones who are actually reading the reproduction of the findings. And so it should be like that. You should be a lot more technical, provide a lot more details, have a lot more research for the engineers. And then for your kind of the people who maybe don't have as much time or aren't very well versed, this isn't their day to day, you want to get rid of all of your jargon and just bring it back to your impact, why it matters, big picture. Numbers are also really helpful if you can kind of explain in like big numbers that convinces them, and talk about like special use cases with your customers. And so it's really, you have to cater your like your message to your audience and make sure that it's a convincing message.
I want to just amplify what she said and how important that is. So, like, I remember when I was doing pen testing, I wrote a report, and it was my first completely independent job as a pen tester, not working with like the big team I was used to, not having my mentor on board. And I gave them the report, and then I was walking through a shopping mall, like a couple blocks away from that office later that week. And the chief information officer was walking kind of the opposite way. So we were going to pass, and he's like, "Hey, you." And I was like, "Ah." Like, I was so nervous. He's like, "I got your report." And my heart was like beating so fast. And he's like, "This is the first time I received a pen test report, and I actually understood the whole thing. Thank you." I feel like they try to talk over my head on purpose. Like, I'm a smart dude. I'm like, "I know that you are a very smart dude." And he's like, "And my engineers all know exactly what to do. They scurried off and started working. There is no, oh gosh, I'm going to have to ask people what the heck this means, or we need to call." He's like, "They're already fixing the things you said." And I was just like, And it made me feel so good. And so being able to communicate effectively means you can get more security done.
Definitely. I think it's always a top down and a bottoms up approach, right? It's if you were only impacting engineers, if they're not kind of given the big picture or the guidance to keep doing what they're doing, they may stop and your efforts aren't scaling. But if you focus on leadership and the engineers at the same time, you're influencing both sides of the org. I think that's a lot more impactful and it's influence that scales. Because I see a lot of people are like, I have all these one-on-ones with developers and they're working, right? Like they trust me, they'll work on those items. But as soon as you're no longer able to have those one-on-ones, whether it's because you leave the company or the person leaves the company, then all of that kind of influence is wasted in that it was only with that one person. I'm sure that they'll continue to care about security throughout their career, but within your organization, it's limited to just that one person. So when you're able to influence just kind of the culture of the org through leaders, I think that's a lot more scalable than just one-on-ones.
So I have one more question and then I swear I'm going to wrap up. My listeners know I'm very bad at saying goodbye. Um, would you say that if someone has very poor communication skills, and so basically a lot of people message me because of Cyber Mentoring Monday and they ask like, I want to work in InfoSec, and a lot of them are interested in becoming pen testers. And it's probably because of cool movies like Hackers. Everyone wants to be Angelina Jolie, and I can, you know, yeah, I see why. She's pretty cool. But would you say, so if someone's like, they're just starting out, would you say that they should just concentrate on technical skills or just concentrate on soft skills, or maybe they need to do both, or what do you think?
Think it's a balance. There actually is this series on Wired where they explain a technical concept in 5 levels. It's like to a 5-year-old, then to a peer. There's actually a security one. And I think that is kind of an activity that does the best of both worlds, where you're explaining a technical topic, but you're also working on your soft skills because you're working on explaining it to different audiences that vary in experience and ability to grasp those concepts. And so you're practicing it for yourself. It's kind of when you're teaching others, you're learning more because you're understanding more about the topic and able to answer any questions. So it's at those 5 levels. It's talk to your industry friends about a new topic. So it's a brown bag topic or just something that you chat with your coworkers about. And then talk to the people in your lives that don't care about security or know about security as much and try to convince them about personal security, for instance. And I think you're working at both, right? You're talking about the topics that you want to learn more about and that you care about, and also working on saying them effectively and efficiently.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good idea, Ariel. Oh, I am so glad I had you on the podcast. So I am going to thank our sponsor. Thank you, Women's Cyber Jitsu, for sponsoring this episode and several episodes of the We Hack Purple podcast. And thank you for letting us sponsor your amazing event, Cyber Jitsu Con, June 24th, online and in person. So go to womenscyberjitsu.com to go check that out. Or if you don't know how to spell it, that's okay. Just look up women, cyber, and jitsu, and it'll make it, you'll find your way there. Don't worry. Um, Ariel, this has been so fun. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so if you were going to leave our listeners and viewers with just one takeaway that you hope that they would think about going forward, what would it be?
Security is all about influence, whether it's giving someone a pen test report or working with a developer. You want to influence them to do the right thing to secure their company. And so working on your soft skills is extremely important for your career.
I could not have said that better myself. Thank you so much, Ariel Shin, for being on the We Hack Purple podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Until next time, listeners and viewers, click the subscribe button. Yeah, actually said it. Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.
I'm very bad at doing all the